I want to say something before we get into these stories. Every person who sent me one of these accounts gave me the same disclaimer. Some version of, I know how this sounds. I'm not the kind of person who makes things up. And the thing is, I believed all of them. Not because the things they described are impossible to explain. Some of them probably aren't, but because the way they wrote about these experiences had a specific quality that I've come to recognize after reading hundreds of these submissions. A kind of flatness, a tired, careful tone. Like someone who has spent months trying to find the boring explanation and has run out of ways to do it. These 5 people went on hikes. Normal hikes. Trails they'd been on before, or trails they'd researched carefully, or trails popular enough that they felt safe going alone. And something happened on each one that they haven't been able to set down since. I've changed their names. I've changed some location details at their request. Everything else is exactly as they described it. If you're going out on a trail anytime in the near future, I'd finish this first. Garrett had been hiking solo for almost 15 years when this happened. I want to be specific about that because it matters. This was not someone who spooked easily. He'd done backcountry routes in 3 different states, winter camping, multi-week solo trips. He knew the difference between the kind of unease that comes from being alone in the woods at night, which is normal, which your brain manufactures on its own, and the kind that comes from something actually being wrong. He was 3 days into a 6-day solo route in the Allegheny National Forest in Pennsylvania. The morning this happened, he broke camp at 6:15 a.m., pushed hard for about 2.5 hours, and stopped around 8:40 to eat at a flat section of trail near a creek crossing. That's when he picked up the smell of wood smoke. He told me it wasn't overwhelming, just a trace, the kind that drifts a long way in cool morning air. He followed it. There was a designated camping area about 30 yards off the trail, and he figured another hiker had camped there the previous night and was still getting their morning started. He stepped off the trail and came around a line of spruce trees. The camp was neat, organized in the way that experienced hikers keep their camps. Nothing scattered, everything in its place. A green 2-person tent, stakes properly driven, rainfly secured. A fire ring with a fire that had burned down to coals, not out, still going, just barely. Small orange flames working at the base. He called out a hello. Nothing. He stood there for a moment. Then he walked a little closer to the fire ring. And that's when he noticed the camp stove sitting on a flat rock about 4 feet from the coals. A small canister stove, the folding kind, a pot on top of it. He leaned down and looked at the pot. Oatmeal, steam still rising off the surface. Next to the stove, a camp mug. He held his hand above it without touching it. The coffee inside was still hot. Garrett told me his first thought was that the hiker had stepped into the trees for a minute and would be back. That's the rational thought. That's the thought you're supposed to have. But then he looked at the tent entrance. Outside the tent flap, set side by side on the ground, were 2 full hiking boots, laced, upright, placed the way you place boots when you're done for the night and you don't want to track dirt inside. It was 8:43 in the morning. He called out again, louder this time. Hello, anyone here? The sound went into the trees and didn't come back. He said what happened next was not a decision exactly. More like his body made the call before his brain caught up. He became completely still, and in that stillness, he became aware of the fact that he was being watched. He told me he knows how that sounds. He knows it's the kind of thing people say. But he's been in the backcountry long enough to trust that feeling when it shows up, and it showed up hard. He turned around slowly and looked at the tree line on 3 sides of the camp, dense enough that someone could be standing 10 feet in and he'd have no idea. The morning light was low and came in at an angle that made the shadows between the trees almost solid. He stood there for probably 30 seconds, scanning. Nothing moved. He left the way he came. He didn't run. He told me deliberately he didn't run. He kept his pace controlled because he didn't want to signal anything to whoever might be watching. He walked back to the main trail, turned north, and pushed hard. About 1.5 miles later, the trail dipped through a narrow, muddy crossing, maybe 3 feet wide, the kind of low, wet spot that only captures a step or two before the ground firms back up. His own prints from that morning were still visible on the far side, and pressed into the mud on the near edge, a single fresh boot print pointed north, the same direction he was heading. The crossing was too narrow and too shallow to have captured more than that one step, but it was enough. He said it wasn't panic exactly, more like a total and complete clarity about what he needed to do. He did not stop again until he hit the trailhead parking lot. He sat in his car for 40 minutes with the doors locked. He watched the trailhead the entire time. Nobody came out. He told me he's filed it in the part of his mind where he keeps the things he can't resolve. He knows there are explanations. Another hiker, startled by a stranger in their camp, watching from the trees until he left. Someone who happened to be heading the same direction. A print that was already there, and he hadn't noticed it on the way through. He accepts all of those possibilities. He just hasn't been back to that section of the Allegheny. Dana had done this trail 4 times before the day this happened. It's a well-maintained route in the Smoky Mountains, popular on weekends, quiet on weekdays. The kind of trail that gets recommended specifically because it's safe for solo hikers. She'd parked in the main trailhead lot before 8 a.m., eaten a full breakfast at a diner in the nearest town on the way in eggs over easy, coffee, paid cash, and was on the trail by 8:20. She was wearing a dark green jacket, tan pants, a day pack she'd had for 6 years. About 90 minutes in, she stopped at a viewpoint to eat a granola bar and drink some water. The view opens up there. You can see 3 ridgelines, and she'd sat at that spot on every previous hike. A man came up the trail from the opposite direction and stopped nearby. Mid-50s, she told me. Average height, wearing a gray fleece and dark pants. No trekking poles, no pack, just a water bottle in his hand. He looked at the view and said something about the weather. She agreed. Normal small talk, the kind you have on the trail with strangers a dozen times before anything registers. Then, he said, "You drove up from Knoxville this morning, right? Long drive for a day hike." Dana told me she didn't answer right away. She said she processed the question for a moment, looking for the angle, some detail he could have read, some reasonable way he could know that. Her plates are Tennessee. That's it. Tennessee plates don't say Knoxville. Thousands of people across the state have Tennessee plates. She told him yeah, without adding anything. He nodded. Then, the blue Subaru, right? I saw it in the lot when I came in. There were 11 cars in that lot when she parked. She'd noticed because she always does a quick scan on solo hikes, a habit. 11 cars in various colors. Hers was the only Subaru, but there were 2 other blue vehicles. She said it was the combination that got her, not the plate state, not the car color alone. The car model, plus the color, plus the city. She ended the conversation politely and kept moving. She looked back twice. The first time he was still at the viewpoint. The second time, about half a mile later, he was gone. She pushed the remaining 4 miles at a pace that had her breathing hard the whole way. She told me she wasn't sure if she was overreacting, that the voice in her head kept generating explanations. Lucky guess. He'd been in Knoxville recently and recognized something. She'd mentioned something she didn't remember mentioning. She made it back to the lot. Her car was fine. Nothing touched. She sat in it and went through the conversation again, word by word. And here's the thing she kept coming back to. To know she'd driven from far away and stopped for breakfast that morning, he would have had to have been watching her before she reached the trailhead. Before the lot. Before the trail. He'd never said anything threatening. He'd never moved toward her. If she reported it to anyone, there was nothing to report. That's what bothers her more than anything else, she told me. Not what he said. But the fact that she spent the entire drive home wondering if she was overreacting to something that, on paper, was just a stranger making conversation. She hikes with a group now. She said she thinks about him every time she pulls into a trailhead parking lot. Every single time. Marcus hiked the same loop in New Hampshire's White Mountains every autumn for 6 years in a row. Same trail, same entry point, same direction. By the 4th year, he barely looked at his map. By the 6th year, he was pointing out landmarks to himself, like old acquaintances, the Leaning Birch at mile 2, the rock face where the trail bends hard left, the creek crossing with the flat stepping stones he'd memorized the placement of. This particular September, the weather was good, and the fall color was at its peak. He was on a section he knew called a long gradual descent through mixed hardwood, maybe mile 8 of a 12-mile loop. He noticed the branch trail and stopped walking. Not a game trail, not a worn patch where someone had cut off the path to relieve themselves. An actual trail packed dirt, no overgrowth at the edges, the kind of surface that develops from years of regular foot traffic. Branching left off the main route at a junction that had never been there before. He pulled up his offline map and zoomed into that section. The branch was not on it. He pulled out the laminated card, a trail system map he'd printed and laminated before his first hike here, and carried every trip since. He found his location. Not on that either. Marcus told me he stood at that junction for a while. He said he knew the correct thing to do was stay on the marked trail. He knew that. He said it out loud to himself. Actually, the correct thing to do is stay on the trail. Then he took the branch. About a quarter mile in, the trees thinned and opened into a clearing. He stopped at the edge of it. A structure sat roughly in the center. Wood-framed, low roof, about the size of a large garden shed. No windows. The wood was weathered gray, but the roof looked solid, no rot, no sag. A narrow metal stovepipe came out of the left wall, angled up and away from the building. Around the structure, evidence of long-term, regular use. A fire ring with a deep ash bed, not from 1 or 2 fires, but from dozens. A flat, worn area beside it where something had been dragged repeatedly, back and forth. A rusted metal bucket hung on a nail by the single door. The door had a padlock on it. The padlock shackle was open, just hanging loose in the hasp unclipped, like someone had left in a hurry and didn't bother pressing it shut. Marcus told me his hands were sweating. He said he was not a person who got nervous easily. He stood outside that door for what he estimated was 2 full minutes, just listening. No sound from inside, no sound from the clearing that was wrong. He opened the door. A folding cot with a sleeping bag on it, recently used. He could see the compression pattern in the fill. A plastic crate with canned food and a headlamp. A second crate turned upside down, used as a table, with a spiral notebook on top of it. He didn't open the notebook, but he looked at the wall to his left. A calendar. Current year, the kind with a full month on each page. September was showing. 5 dates circled in red pen. Thick circles, deliberate. He counted back from today. 3 of the 5 circled dates had already passed. The 4th one was today's date. The 5th was 2 weeks away. He left the notebook where it was. He pulled the door closed behind him. He walked back to the main trail at a pace he described as controlled, not running, but not stopping either. He filed a report with the Forest Service when he got home. A ranger went out 4 days later. They found the clearing, the fire ring, the worn ground area, all of it exactly as Marcus described. The trail to the clearing showed years of use in the vegetation pattern. The structure was gone, completely removed. No drag marks, no debris, no hardware left in the ground where it had been anchored. The ranger told Marcus they were keeping the report on file and would continue to monitor the area. Marcus told me he appreciated that. He told me he accepted all the reasonable possibilities: a hunting camp, a survivalist setup, someone who monitors the area and saw his report coming. But here is what he comes back to every single time. That fifth circled date on the calendar. He has no idea what was supposed to happen on that day. He made sure he wasn't anywhere near the White Mountains to find out. He hasn't been back to that trail since. Before the next one, if you're watching this, and you've had something happen on a trail that you've never told anyone, drop it in the comments below. I read every one. And if you're new here, subscribe right now. New stories every week. This account comes from a group of friends. I'll call them Ryan, Josh, Keely, and Ben. They were on day 3 of a 5-day backcountry route in the Cascade Range in Washington State. Remote enough that cell service had been gone since the first afternoon, running on GPS and a hand-marked paper map they'd built before the trip. Ryan told me that by day 3, the group had found their rhythm, the kind of comfortable silence that develops when 4 people have been in the wilderness together long enough. Not much talking on the trail, just moving. Josh found the radio at approximately 2:10 in the afternoon. It was sitting in the center of the trail. Not dropped, not fallen from a pack. Sitting, a Baofeng UV5R, the inexpensive handheld kind that hikers and overlanders sometimes carry. In good condition, no cracks, no visible damage. Battery was still holding charge, the kind of level you'd expect from something used recently, not something abandoned out there for weeks. Ryan told me the 4 of them stood around it for a moment without picking it up. He said that was the first thing that felt off, that none of them immediately reached for it, that they all just looked at it. Josh picked it up, turned it on. It powered up. They tried several frequencies, static on most of them. On one, Ryan couldn't tell me the exact frequency because they didn't note it at the time, which he's regretted since they got a signal. A man's voice, clear enough to understand, calm, even-toned, speaking in short sentences with gaps between them. Ryan described it as the cadence of someone reading from notes. Deliberate, no emotion. They stood in the middle of the trail and listened. The voice described a group of 4 hikers, 2 men and 2 women. It described Ryan's pack, the color, the brand, the tear on the top strap that he'd repaired with duct tape. It described the specific orange color of Keely's hat and the striped pattern on it. It described the jacket Josh was wearing, a red soft shell with a vertical zipper pocket on the left chest. Every detail was accurate. Then, it described where they had stopped for lunch 3 hours earlier, a wide, flat boulder field next to a stream crossing, which was correct. It described the order they'd crossed the stream: Ryan first, then Keely, then Josh, then Ben. Also correct. Then, the voice stopped, and there was only static. Ryan told me the 4 of them stood there, not talking, for probably a full minute. He said he was the one who finally said it out loud: "Someone can see us right now." He said the words had a specific effect on all 4 of them. They all turned outward at the same time, scanning the trees on both sides of the trail. Whoever it was, if they were watching from cover, they were invisible. They tried transmitting on the same frequency. No response. They kept the radio, checked it every hour. Nothing. On the afternoon of day 4, during a water break at camp, it came back. Same voice, same calm tone. Their location, accurate. Their campsite described correctly, where the tents were positioned relative to each other, where the bear hang was. Then one new detail. The voice noted that there were now 3 tents instead of 2. Ben and Keely had set up separately the night before after an argument. Ryan told me nobody had spoken about that on the trail. It hadn't come up at all. Then the voice said, they found it. Static, nothing else. Ever. They cut the route short and came out a full day early via an emergency egress path, moving fast and not stopping until they hit the trailhead. Ryan said the four of them barely exchanged 50 words on the way out. At the ranger station, Ryan gave the radio to the ranger on duty and described exactly what had happened. He said the ranger listened to all of it, took notes, didn't ask them to repeat anything, didn't look confused, didn't express surprise. Then the ranger said it was probably illegal radio broadcasting a hobby, sometimes shows up in remote areas. Ryan said it was the word probably that he couldn't put down. Not definitely, not that's what that is. Probably. He's been back to the Cascades twice. Different range, different entry point, different everything. He told me he left the radio at the station and didn't look back at it. He said he was glad to be rid of it. I saved this one for last because it's the one that stayed with me the longest after Patricia submitted it. She'd researched the trail carefully. A well-known route in Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina, popular enough to feel safe on a solo trip, remote enough to get actual quiet. She parked at the trailhead lot at 7:50 a.m. on a Tuesday, signed the trail register she always does, she told me. A habit from years of solo hiking, and was moving by 8:05. 2 hours in, she stepped off the trail into the trees to answer a call of nature. About 40 feet off the path, just far enough. On her way back to the trail, she almost walked directly into it. A metal box attached to the trunk of a mature pine tree at chest height, roughly the size of a shoebox, secured with 2 metal straps that had been bolted directly into the bark. Weatherproofed, she described the edges as sealed, no rust, maintained, a small combination padlock on the front latch. Her first thought was geocache. She said that immediately, and clearly geocache. She pulled up her offline map. Nothing listed at that location. She opened a geocaching app she downloaded months ago for a different trip and never deleted. No listing within several miles. She stood in front of the box for a moment. The padlock was hanging loose in the hasp. Not locked. Just resting there, the shackle open, like someone had unclipped it recently and didn't bother pressing it shut. She pulled it free and opened the latch. Inside, wrapped carefully in a sealed Ziploc bag, was a stack of photographs. Printed photos, glossy finish. She pulled them out slowly and started going through them. All hikers. Candid shots nobody posed, nobody looking at the camera. Taken from elevation, from cover, from angles that made it clear the subjects had no idea they were being photographed. Couples, solo hikers, a family with a dog, a group of older women with matching packs. She counted 46 photographs. She flipped each one over. On the back of every photo, in small and very clean handwriting, a date and a line of text. Some were descriptions. Gray jacket, red pack, came from the South Trailhead. Some were shorter. Just one word. Alone. Some had numbers that she had no context for. She went through all 46 of them, and then she reached the last one in the stack. She told me she knew immediately when she looked at it. The light in the photo was the low-angle early morning light that had been there when she left her car that morning. The angle was elevated, taken from above the parking lot, from the tree line at the upper edge of the lot. The shot showed 4 cars, including hers, and in front of her car, a woman with her back half turned to the camera, adjusting the straps on her pack. The woman was her. Patricia put the photographs back in the bag. She placed the bag back in the box. She closed the latch. She pressed the padlock shut. She walked out of the trees and back to the marked trail. She told me she was proud of the fact that she kept her pace under control all the way back to the trailhead. That she did not run. She hiked out at a normal pace, and she kept her breathing even. She sat in her car with the engine running, and the doors locked, and called the police. 2 officers responded. She walked them to the tree. The box was there. The bolt marks were there, fresh metal shining around each anchor point. The straps were on the ground, cut cleanly. The box was empty. One of the officers photographed everything and took her full statement. He searched the surrounding area thoroughly. He came back and told her that whoever maintained that box had been alerted, possibly by her returning to the trail, possibly by something else, and had cleared it before they arrived. He said she'd done the right thing by leaving immediately and not touching anything further. She told him, "Thank you." She meant it. She told me it didn't help much. Because here's the thing that Patricia comes back to every time she thinks about that morning. That photograph was taken before she reached the trail, before she signed the register, before she took a single step, which means whoever was behind the camera was in that parking lot watching her arrive. They chose her. They took the photo. They put it in the box on that tree before she ever started hiking. She still hikes, she told me. She wasn't going to let it take that from her. But she doesn't go alone anymore. She doesn't sign trail registers anymore. She varies her routes. She varies her arrival times. And she told me, and this is how she ended her account, and I think about it every time I open a new submission, she told me that she has never once stepped off a marked trail since that day. Not even for a minute. Not even 40 feet. Not ever. 5 people. 5 trails. 5 things that came home with them. I'll say what I always say, some of these have explanations. I can build a reasonable case for parts of most of them if I sit with it long enough. But I've been doing this long enough to know the difference between a story someone constructed and a story someone is still living inside of. Every one of these people wrote to me the way you write about something you haven't figured out how to set down yet. That specific quality doesn't fake well. If something happened to you on a trail, something you've carried around for years because you didn't know who to tell it to, the comments are open right now. I read every single one. This is exactly the place for it. Hit the like button if you made it all the way to the end. It matters more than you know for a small channel like this one. Subscribe if you want to be here for what's coming next week. I've been sitting on it for a while, and I'm genuinely not sure how to introduce it. You'll see why. Stay on the marked trail. Tell someone where you're going. I'll see you in the next one.